Welcome to the Key to Growth podcast, Home Services Marketing Unlocked, with me, your host, Jen McKee. Every week, I sit down with top marketers in the trades, from the brains behind $100 million companies to those scaling from 1 to 3, even to 10 million, breaking down exactly how they got where they are and uncover the secret to their success. If you're ready to grow your business and get real, actionable insights, you are in the right place. Let's unlock the key to your marketing success, starting now. Welcome back, everybody. I am honored and excited to have Dan Antonelli with me. I have his book here too, just so I can prove that I got it. I was hoping it would be like signed or something, but no, it doesn't come signed. It's great though. So I'm super excited to have Dan here because if you don't know who Dan is, then I'm not sure what you've been doing. But Dan is the king of branding here in the trades and service industry. So why don't you introduce yourself? Because I feel like I'm going to butcher it here.
Sure. So I run a branding agency here in New Jersey. I think at this point we have 40 employees. We do primarily home service branding. This is our 30th year this year, actually, which is kind of cool. And we basically try to help home service companies develop a brand that is more disruptive, more unique, and more memorable in their communities. So we do a lot of things related to branding and then the integration of the brand on different channels. So we obviously do vehicles and truck wrap designs. We do collateral. We do email marketing, some social media stuff, things like that. Just basically try to coordinate the touch points for the customer so that when a customer interacts with that home service company's brand, that everything looks and is delivering that promise to them.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, we're just going to dive in. And the thing is that at the end here, we'll be sure and have all of Dan's social media handles and all of those things. But if you are learning about branding, not only is this podcast going to be highly beneficial, but Dan has so many resources for you, including just like following him on social media and searching his name in groups because he's very benevolent. And when people post what they're planning on doing and spending a lot of money on, Dan always jumps in and tries to save them. I'm not sure how often it works. I hope it works more than it doesn't. But okay, so you've obviously worked with thousands of people. Let's start at the beginning. And I know on social media you've told your story, but how did you end up in the trades industry? Like, how did you end up with this reputation that you have now? What did it start off as?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I mean, when I was younger, I was initially interested in lettering on cars and race cars and things like that. And my brother was into hot rods and he would get these hot rod magazines and I would see all this cool lettering on these race cars. And I didn't necessarily care too much about the car. Well, I'm kind of a car guy, but I was really interested in the lettering that I was seeing. They were doing some cool stuff with airbrushing and things like that. So I started getting into hand painting and hand lettering trucks and signs. And then I was doing actually pinstriping on cars and motorcycles and things like that. So it's kind of funny because like during high school, I was just so obsessed with lettering and typography. And, you know, my friends would after school, hey, we're going to go hang out. What are you doing? Oh, yeah, I'm going home to letter some alphabets. So I was kind of an oddball in high school to a certain extent because I was really interested in just how letters were formed, what the letters communicated. And I got to start basically a side hustle at like 15 or 16 years old where I was doing signs and I was actually lettering trucks for mainly contractors. And, you know, the first truck that I lettered was for a home service contractor. I did it in my parents' backyard. You know, I spent the weekend on it. I don't know, maybe I got like $200 or something for it, but I was super proud. And I think at the time, I really also just got a sense of pride when I would see my work out in the wild. So after you did the van, and then if you happen to be driving and you saw the van driving by, you're like, I did that. And yeah, it's almost bizarre. It's like 40 years later, and I'm still very proud of the work that we do. And when I see something out in the wild that we did, you still feel that sense of pride. I mean, our work's all over the country, so we don't often see it in person, but it is nice when we travel and we go to different locations and, you know, you just randomly driving somewhere and you see something that you did. I still feel that sense of pride. And I think from the very early on, I was just so obsessed with the craft and I was so obsessed with just being as good as I possibly could. And I worked for a sign painter. I got blessed to work for a sign painter when I was, I think, 17, just before I went away to college. And, you know, he instilled in me so much about obviously the level of work that we wanted to be known for. And also just, he taught me so much about layout and composition, legibility. And I think that often that is something that that experience, I think, just can't be replicated, So when you design something on a computer screen versus actually physically lettering something on the side of the van, in my mind, you have a deeper appreciation for the nuances of legibility and composition and layout. So, I really wanted to be a sign painter. I was like, this is heaven for me. Going there and just lettering all day long was the best thing ever. But my parents thought maybe better for me to go to college. And so I said, well, what could I go to college for that I might still be interested in, even though I love this other thing? And so I went to the University of Scranton and I studied advertising.
Okay.
So I got a degree in that, and I happened to actually work in their publications office. It wasn't a design school at all. So I was really actually probably in the wrong school, honestly. But I did learn a lot about communications, skills, which was good. And then I also happened to intern in their publications office and work for an art director. And that's where I got my design school education from. So to me, it was like the best of both worlds. And you were supposed to go like 10 hours a week or something like that. And I was there every second I possibly could be. So I was there like 30 hours a week, even though I was not supposed to be there nearly as much. And then even when my internship was up, I just kept showing up. I'm like, hey, I'm just going to sit behind you.
Right.
So I took advantage of that as much as I could. And even while I was in Scranton, the university hired me to paint all the signs for all the events. This is obviously before a lot of stuff was being done online. So I was really painting signs that would hang up in the student center, and then I'd paint over them and do the next round for next week. So I was still always hustling and doing that. And then I graduated. I started working as a graphic designer in New York City. And then I launched the business while I was doing that full time. I had a really good job as a graphic designer, and then I got promoted a few times. But I just missed working with entrepreneurs. I missed lettering. I missed working on vehicles. And I thought at the time, I said, wouldn't it be cool if a small business could go somewhere and get like their logo, their stationery, their uniforms, their lettering for their vehicles, a brochure, stationery, like all these things from one place? Because what I saw in my mind was like, they would have all these different vendors doing all these different things. And I was like, well, none of it looks like any of it matches.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting that even, 30 years later or so, that's really the foundation of what we believe in, is just continuity in your channels and making sure everything is brand centric and it's focused. So, interesting background, but I'm still really passionate about what we do. I still really believe in the work that we do. And I think the notion that we've really instilled here as part of our core values is the notion that our work has the ability to change people's lives.
Yeah.
And to ultimately respect the craft and respect that responsibility that we're hired for, and to understand that, essentially we're designing as if lives are at stake. And that's really what we really preach to everyone here. Design as if their lives were at stake with our work. And so I think that that's served us very well. We often have a really tight relationship with our clients, and the effect that the work has had on their lives. And they're also just so gracious about it too, and so grateful. And we're very cognizant internally about how that feedback is also shared with the team. At this point, 40 people, you want to make sure that everyone that is part of the team still understands how critical their role is. So, we're very diligent about sharing that feedback with them and helping them to, again, just always understand that you're essentially playing with someone's livelihoods when you do a branding project on for them. So it's really, to me, still exciting, still fun. We do a lot of brands. I think last year we did almost 300 brands, which is
amazing. Yeah.
But we have some of the most incredibly talented designers working on them. I get to still oversee what goes out the door, but I'm not doing as much design as I might like. But that's okay too. Like, some of the people have been with me. One of our lead designers has been with me for 20 years. And,
nice.
He oversees the brand people now, and everyone knows what's expected, and everyone knows, the philosophy that we subscribe to and how things need to get done. So it's fun, and I've just really also, you mentioned about Facebook and just, sharing as much information. I feel like I try so hard to share as much as I possibly can. 95% of the people will never become a client of ours, and that's okay. But I also just, when you see something that is not going to help them, and if you have the opportunity to just, give them feedback and try to help them understand a little bit more about the subject, because ultimately, like, I want everyone to win, but it makes me sad sometimes when I see what they just bought or what they just wrapped their truck in. Like today, somebody just on my feed, like they sent me a friend request. I'm not exactly sure, when they got their brand new truck wrap, and it was so sad for me to see, like, they were proud of it and everything, but it wasn't a great name. And then it said Home Services and it had a mascot, and there was no other information on it. And I was like, what home services do you provide? Like, so here you just dropped $5,000 on this truck wrap, and it's not actually going to help your business. And that part makes me sad. So, I try to just give as much info. Like, I'm not going to post on his page and just say, give him the feedback, because I don't want to come off that way either, but I do feel bad. Like I wish he understood more about why what he just got is not going to ultimately help him. And I'm sure you see that stuff all the time too. Like you probably see stuff and you're just like, do you tell them, or like, do you not say anything? Because I don't want to come across the wrong way, but I wish I could help you understand. Sometimes I'll send them a private message. I say, hey, next time, if you get a chance, just maybe look to do this instead.
Yeah.
And honestly, 95% of the people are appreciative of that feedback.
Yeah.
So,
and a lot of people ask, like I see in groups where people are like, hey, what do you think? And sometimes they're probably directly hoping that you'll comment on their stuff. And sometimes they'll even tag you in it, but sometimes they're genuinely excited and just like sharing it for the sake of sharing. And I always think that your feedback to them, it obviously comes from a great place. And honestly, everything you just said in that story, it still holds true to the type of work that you guys do, everything that you started with, all of the design background that you had. I love. And so I went to school for graphic design. I ended up switching my major into interior design because graphic design is really hard, by the way, which I'm sure you know this. I am not a perfectionist. And in graphic design, there's a lot of things that have to be perfect. I went to school at the Academy of Art University in San Francisco, and one of the classes was, I don't remember what it was called, but we had to take this like square and then make 45-degree lines through it to have nothing could be off within like 1/32 of an inch. And like my square was not, like it wasn't good. But this is my first semester or whatever. It was hard. But I was like, okay, I'm going to look at design from a different way. And I think social media is a great place for me because it takes so much of design elements and mixed with communication and also just authenticity. It's so fun. And the work doesn't last as long. So if it's not perfect within 1/32 of an inch, we'll be okay. And then we can use Dan's branding to make it really shine. So, but I love all of that. And I'm super interested for my own sake. And I think that this is really interesting. So like your very first brand with KickCharge, like, so is this still, so if you compare, obviously your first brand to now is going to be so different because you guys have learned so much and your strategy has changed so much, but like, is this still a brand that's around? Do you still see it? Do you remember the very first one that you worked on under KickCharge Creative?
So it's really funny you say that because I teach wrap design to other sign companies and wrap shops. Again, certainly not something I'm getting rich doing, but I think it's really important, again, to try to elevate the trade as much as I possibly can. So I love to teach. And one of the slides in the deck that I use as the teaching tool is this company called Rich's Auto. And it was a automotive shop in Sterling, New Jersey. And I checked a couple of years ago and it was still, their Facebook page was up. It was still the same exact logo that I had done. Yeah. That's going on 20 years.
That's awesome.
And I remember that I sold it for $25. And
No way.
Yeah. And I thought, oh my God, this is so cool. Like people are paying me to design logos. And I was super proud at the time. You know, the interesting thing about the actual logo is a lot of the traits that are really important were visible then, you know, legibility, composition, and, you know, I don't think it would look like a bad logo. It might look a little bit dated maybe, but it still is better than most of the stuff that sometimes I see out there. So, but we've come a long way. I think the other thing too is I recognized very early on that while I was very skilled in lettering and I was very skilled with layout, I was not an illustrator. And those are very unique skill sets. Like illustration versus typography are two different worlds.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are surprised that I can't draw. I cannot draw. Like you want me to draw
I bet you could, like a little bit. I bet you have.
Well, this is what I could draw. I could draw something that is like a building. I could draw.
Yeah.
Like something that is mechanical.
With like lines and
I can draw things like that, but you want me to interpret someone's face or develop a mascot. I can't do it. I was never trained on it. I'm not good at it. So the illustrator that works for me now, that's been with me for 20 years, that was one of my first hires.
Right.
I would do the lettering and then I would say, hey, Jeff, give me like a mascot over here, like in this logo.
Right.
And then he would pencil sketch it, and that's how we did it. But I think that was a good lesson, even just early on, learning that, first of all, you can't be good at everything. And secondly, hire people that do things that complement your own skill set and don't be intimidated by that.
For sure.
So Jeff would do these amazing mascots or these amazing illustrations and, you know, still with us today. Jeff is one of the people who did the branding with me for Gettle. Like, so that's his work, Gettle Air Conditioning. famous brands that we've done. So, I think that was an important thing to learn as early on as possible, is to not be intimidated by that. Like it was okay that I was surrounding myself with people that were much better at certain things than I was.
That's how we level up. I have to say, you've always really inspired me with this idea of like trying to elevate all of the trades in whatever way possible. And I try to do the same thing with social media for sure. And it's funny, you just made me think. So recently, my very first social media client was a bar. It was a friend of ours bar. And they just hired this local company to me to do their social media, because we don't work with bars and restaurants anymore. But the company that they hired, I see them at award shows all the time. I know that they're really great. And so I'm seeing what they're posting now. And I'm like, I feel like this is really similar to what I did. And I like scrolled all the way back and I was like, oh my gosh, I did like that. I'm like proud of myself. See, look, I still followed the same things. Sometimes you have to look back at yourself and be like, I knew what I was doing then. Like, yes, it wasn't as refined as it is now, but I totally feel that. Okay, so let's get to, so we work on social media and we have a lot of clients that have gone through Rebrand. So with KickCharge, and I told Dan before that it makes a big difference in their social media and our impressions and our reach and our engagement. I'm curious though, because I do have a lot of clients that aren't rebranded. And so when they come to me asking about like, is this something that I should invest in right now? What is the right time for somebody to start thinking about rebranding? And then, I work with a lot of legacy companies and they've been around for 30, 60, whatever, years. And the thought of that is really intimidating. So obviously you work with people at all different levels. When is the right time for them to come to you guys?
I think the simplest answer is to think about whether or not the brand actually reflects what they've evolved into and what they've become. And quite often they use, I don't want to say the excuse, but they use whatever place or moment in time that they're at currently as the reason why they should never change. So
yeah.
I've gotten to this point with this brand. Why would I ever change it? And we always look at it and we always say, it's amazing that you've got to where you're at with this brand. Imagine what you could do with a better brand. And so a lot of times you think about entrepreneurs when they start, they're cash strapped, they're bootstrapping the whole thing, right? They're trying to figure out, hey, listen, I got to get a truck on the road and I got to just start making money. Then it's 2 years later and 3 years later, and it's the same thing that they bootstrap on the side of the van, but yet they're delivering this excellent service. But if you were to judge them by some of these other touch points, like the truck, their social media voice, their website, you can't get there. When they get in the home, they ring the doorbell, they kill it, and the customer's super happy and leaves them with this great impression. But everything that branding is trying to do is trying to control what someone believes about the experience before they hire you. So if I can have them believe that the experience is going to be amazing, that the service will be terrific, that you'll honor your work, that you'll be honest, that you'll be trustworthy. If I can help control those impressions before they call you, then that's ultimately the goal, because those are the things that ultimately will affect their booking rate and their close rates and their average tickets. Those are all the things that also will affect the cost per acquisition. For you, I'm sure you see a direct relationship to someone that is actively getting involved in the community, that has a brand that is known throughout the community, and how much more engagement they get on social media.
For sure.
Versus somebody that is, just has kind of a generic brand, one that doesn't really connect in any meaningful way with the people that they're trying to sell. And generally speaking, those are the people that are, overspending on their marketing. They're needing to spend so much more to get their leads. And there's no search volume for branded keyword searches, because in the community, no one knows they exist. Even though they think everyone knows me, the reality is most people don't know who they are, right? So those are all the things too. And I think, Jen, you've seen so much talk about being outmanned and outgunned by private equity from a marketing spend perspective. The one thing I would say is that while PE is very astute with numbers, they're sometimes not as astute as it comes to understanding the relationship between brand and their marketing spend.
Yeah.
And they're also not generally making initiatives and inroads into the communities through community events and community engagement. So to me, that's kind of the opportunity that I see for the family-owned businesses that are worried about what is happening in the marketplace and how do I compete with that. And to that, I say, listen, you have to work on becoming 5 Mile famous. You have to become the name that people think of, because if we can live in their minds rent-free, then they're going to type in your name when they need service, and they're not going to type in air conditioning repair near me.
Yeah.
And as soon as you can live in their minds, you're going to see great things happening. Your marketing spend should go down. Your cost per lead will go significantly down. And so I think that that's the cool part too over the last several years, really looking at the data and what the data suggests about branding and its relationship, its direct relationships to marketing, booking rates, close rates, all those key metrics. It's so funny because I'm in the process of actually updating the book. I'm doing a second edition of the book. And part of why I really wanted to do that is I felt like the first edition, it touched on some data points, but it didn't have as much meat into some data points. And we've accumulated a bunch of data from different digital marketing companies that really paint a pretty significant picture about the impact of brand. And so I think, I'm sure for you, Jen, listen, you know when you have a really good brand to work with, how much more creative you can get with your post, how much more fun, even from a story perspective. Like so many companies legitimately, if you were to ask them, well, what is your brand story? You know, I sincerely doubt that 90% of them would be able to actually communicate what that is. So, you know, it's almost like going back to basics when you think about just that visibility in the community. And it's ironic to me sometimes that people are like, well, let me just spend more money on LSA. Let me just spend more money on PPC. And I'm like, well, wouldn't it be easier if like sponsored the soccer teams and went to a few community events and parades and things like that? You know, a funny story, my daughter does marching band and they had a community event that they were marching through the streets of Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, where she goes to school. And so all the streets are lined with everyone from the community. And it's like 3 deep. Like there's a lot of, like, we hadn't gone to a lot of these. And I was like, oh my God, there's like a lot of people at this parade. And they have the band playing amidst different floats and a lot of businesses sponsored stuff. And you got, you know, a 1.5 mile stretch of streets and the van's going 3 miles an hour. Like you can't help but actually look at the van. Like there's nothing else to look at. Like, and I just like, that's the kind of stuff with that sticky branding that if you're doing stuff like that, like people will remember it if it's done well. If it's going to be sun and snowflakes for your HVAC company, I don't know that they're going to remember you in 6 months or a year. So
you know, it's funny because I think about the things that you teach. I learned so much from you on social media. Just another little thing there. If you're not following Dan and looking at what he's saying, you're missing out on a ton of great information. But it makes me think when I see trucks on the road, like the ones that have stood out to me my whole life, and it's because of their branding. And it's because of their branding, and then because I keep seeing them, and because of their commercials, and it's all of these things put together. But lots of people are doing those things. It's really the ones with the brands that are different that are making an impact on me because they look different and they're standing out. So I challenge anybody who's like, I don't know, Dan, like I think that my fire and my snowflakes are good, to tell me, you know, other people in your area that have the same kind of branding. And it's hard to stand out when you all look the same. So that really brings me to like, besides the snowflakes and the heat, the flame, right? Like what are some other common mistakes that you see when people are trying to stand out, just like totally missing the marks? Are there any like things you can think of off the top of your head? I know there's a bunch of them. I've seen, you know, things about them, but what are they?
Well, I mean, right off the bat, naming is a big one.
Yeah.
So many people get the name of their company wrong from day one. So they name it after themselves or their last name, or they use initials, which is even worse. So those are the two single.
But sometimes it works. So how do you know? Because I know you rebrand some people. Like, okay, so we work with Tuck and How. That's like a really tough name. That isn't an easy name.
Ideal name. We did figure out a way to sort of leverage that history and that heritage of that brand. And he had equity in that name. So you have to look at some of those things. But if you're a 1-year-old company with a really bad name and 500,000 in revenue, that's usually a no-brainer to make a change at that point. But if you're 10 years into it and 5 million in revenue, that's a much different conversation.
Okay. So that does impact it.
Yeah. So naming is one thing. So you want to think about names that evoke a promise. So if I didn't say anything at all about your company, but just your name, it would have me feel something positive about the experience. Another good tip is naming a company that will evoke a specific visual. So as soon as you say the name of the company, you think you know what the company should look like. Like if it was Red Rabbit Heating and Air, well, I'm pretty sure the mascot's going to be a red rabbit, right? So, and those visual cues help people remember things, right? So that's the reason why you have those things done like that. So naming is certainly a big part of it. Even as it relates to mascots, you know, it's interesting because mascots sometimes they generate a lot of hate, which is kind of interesting.
We love anything polarizing, at least.
Yeah. And I think I agree with a lot of the hate that's directed towards mascots. And the reason why I agree with it is because most of the mascots that you see that are being developed are done so poorly that reflects back into the consumer's expectations. So
that makes sense.
Me, like, hey, should you use a mascot or not use a mascot? And you can make arguments for either one. But I think if you go with a mascot, just make sure it's rendered professionally. professionally. Some of the stuff that I see it just shake my head, and I'm so sad for whoever is using it because it's communicating the opposite of what you want to that consumer. Thinking about some of those things for sure. And, again, like I said,
what about
thinking about
color
what the story
schemes?
is.
So, I mean, I know blue and red, right? We're always thinking about heating and air, and then blue is always thinking about plumbing. And it's not like you guys are like, okay, we're not using blue and red in anything that we do. So how do you determine the colors?
Yeah, so colors are really market driven. So depending on the market that you're in is really where you want to research the opportunities for unique colors and color palettes in that particular market. So when we do a brand for someone, part of our process is obviously researching who the biggest competitors are, who are the top 10 people in your space. We're going to look at their brands. We're going to look at what type of branding they have, and then we're going to look at their colors. And so if we see a prevalence of a set of colors in any given market, those are colors that we want to avoid because I don't want to put a same color in a market. Like, for example, if you were to brand in Philadelphia, I would say orange is off the table because Horizon Home Services is in Philadelphia and they have 200 trucks on the road and they're all orange.
Yeah, so you don't want to compete with that.
Yeah, I can't really expect to go into that market in my orange van and have that be associated with me. Instead, it'll actually be associated with my competitor. So definitely try to think about colors that no one has used in your market. You got to be brave when it comes to picking colors too, because sometimes the instinct is to fall back on what feels normal and natural. And we want you to think about brands as far as unique colors. Even Tuck & Howell, as an example, has a really, really unique color palette. It's teal and orange and gray. So those are colors that you probably don't see every day. And thus, because you don't see them every day, when you do see them, they tend to stand out a little bit more. And, listen, you probably heard me hate a little bit on my social media about a red, white, and blue. And it's not that I'm unpatriotic. It's just that you can't own it.
Yeah,
so
right.
I don't care what market you're in. Having people only associate your brand with red, white, and blue is a really tall order because it's associated with Americana. It's like trying to do a red, white, and blue brand in Texas.
Have you done an Americana brand? Because I've talked to people who are maybe very veteran owned or have a Patriot type brand. Yeah,
we have. We absolutely have done a lot of red, white, and blue vans and brand. And strategically, there would be a reason for us to continue either with that color scheme or not. Even when we did Absolute Airflow for Victor Rancourt, his entire building was blue already. Everything was blue and red, actually. And so, you can't abandon something like that either sometimes. So you have to measure the equity of that. But if you were starting from scratch, I would absolutely tell you to never use red, white, and blue. So there is a reason and a time and a place where it does make sense to continue it.
Yeah.
But certainly if you were starting, I would say never use it.
Okay. I mean, it's funny because what you just said was a lot of contradicting statements. And I mean that in a really great way, because I feel like that's what happens when I talk to people about social media is that there isn't a hard and fast rule for things. There's a lot of rules and a lot of reasons why things are done the way they're done. And that's why it's great to actually talk to professionals like Dan whenever you're making a big decision, like changing your brand. I know you guys went through a rebrand at some point in your timeline. What was that like for you? You did your rebrand, right?
Yes. In 2017, we named ourselves to KickCharge Creative. Previously, we were called Graphic Designs, and it was Graphic D-Signs. And, 30 years ago, I thought that was super clever because I'm like, well, we're going to do graphic design work, and we also do signs. So I thought, right. And my name is Dan. So I had all these reasons why I thought it was a really good idea.
Yeah.
I wish I had been able to read my book back then because I wouldn't have made that mistake. But again, you evolve over time. And then, in 2007, we actually completely stopped doing actual vehicles and only did design work at that point. So I'm like, why do we still call this? But, again, I fell into the same trap that I talk to my clients about. You can make a change. It's okay. And even though it's a little scary, you're going to come out on the other side in a much better place. But I had that kind of warm blanket syndrome that I talk about where I was comfortable. Everything seemed to be working. Why should I change? And I knew it was tough from a recruitment perspective because I knew it didn't sound like a place employees wanted to work for. It was kind of weird. And I had all these reasons why I should keep it. But when we decided to build this new office that we're in now, I said, that's when we're going to make the change. And so we named the KickCharge. I felt like the name captured more about the energy that we infuse into businesses and the spark that we provide. So there was a lot of other storylines that we could build off of from that particular brand name that I could never get there with KickCharge. And there is zero chance that we would have grown and arrived at this place in time if we had not made that change. So I think it was good for me to to go through that experience, because prior to that, I was just kind of like when, talking to clients about change, and I don't think I appreciated how hard that might be for an owner. And then I went
Yeah.
through it and I was like, oh, this shit's freaking hard, man.
Yeah, seriously. I know. I think about it a lot because my name represents everything that you say is bad. And I know I'm not a trades company, but I'm still a business owner. And my name, like if you were to try to search it, you would never get the spelling right. And like it's totally based off of my last names. And there's all these things wrong with it. And one day I might have to change it, but I have found ways to make it work with like the keywords. So
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah. I think it's hard to, listen, and I think also like if you told your family and your friends, hey, I'm changing the name of my company, you would probably receive so much negative feedback.
People wouldn't get it. Already my husband was like, it would be like, because I brought it up to him, like, I think I need to change my name. And he's like, you can't change your name. But like, I try to say not so, like you have to, the business, there's always this idea that like the business can't be your baby. Like so many people are like, oh, the business is your baby. And that's a little bit dangerous because then you don't allow it to grow in the way that it needs to. And sometimes it needs to grow in a way that you don't want to do because that's not how it started or whatever.
100%. And I had so much negative feedback from people. They're like, oh my God, why would you have a change? Like my family was like, that's crazy. You can't change the name. And no one really understood it. And then, afterwards, of course, they understood it a lot better. But when I told them we were doing it, I mean, some employees cried.
Aw, that is so hard.
But then it was funny because then once we decided to do it, it was funny because the building took a lot longer to finish than we had hoped to, but we actually had the logo done like 6 months before we were able to move into the space. But I was obsessed with the name and the logo. Like I was wearing branded stuff 6 months before we really like announced it because I was just so ready for it and I just couldn't wait to get it launched. But no, it was a good experience to go through. And certainly, I mean, I approach it a little bit differently today and understanding sort of the mental attachment that people have to their current brands, their current logos, all those things. Yeah. But I think also the one thing too that we didn't really talk about is the notion of what happens to these businesses after either a rebrand or even a rename takes place. Like you could talk to Jay at Tuck and Howell and his wife about what it's done to their mindset.
Yeah. 100%. Definitely.
It's like such a game changer from that perspective about the renewed passion and energy that it brings into the business. And then what that passion translates and signifies to the employees that work there. So the commitment to building a better future for everyone in the company. So that becomes the catalyst for that and those types of communications. So I think it's ironic and interesting that people don't come to me and say, hey, Dan, we want to rebrand because I want to change my mindset. That's really what happens to so many people. And then afterwards, they're like, oh my God, I didn't realize how this was going to affect me personally and what it was going to do to energize me and the staff. And, it's just something that is really interesting, I think, to see from a psychological standpoint, what it does, the energy it brings back to a business sometimes, especially ones that have been, kind of stagnant for several years.
Yeah. I mean, but there is this idea of like, you have to look like who you want to be in the future. And so, when you have this super professional brand that is consistent throughout, the training rooms and the trucks and all of the uniforms, and then like all this swag, everybody's got all these things and it just it can't help but to turn you into something different than who you were before that. Like there's no other choice. And so I know that, and I've seen you've won awards on like ROI from Rebrands and like, how do we measure that, and I'm sure you have a lot of different things that you're looking at. And it just comes down to like what every other piece of marketing is. Like it's one piece of the puzzle. Like, so now once you've invested in this, now you're, like you mentioned, of course, your Google search is going to change because people are going to be searching directly for you, but maybe then you're also going to be in the community more. And then the community's going to remember you more. And maybe you're going to buy cooler swag that they're going to keep in their house longer because you have this great brand, or they're going to see your uniforms at the gas station and your trucks and they're going to remember it. And then they're going to see you on social media and it's going to become more memorable. And so all of these things are, and then also that mindset shift of like who you're showing up as and who you're allowing on your team and what you're teaching them when they go in the house and how much more confident they feel going into the house with these new uniforms. Like there's so many things that are playing into this. Is there a real way to measure it? Is it all of those things? Like how do you take all of that into account?
I mean, ROI on digital spends are easy to sort of benchmark. Organic results, branded keyword searches, those are all things that you can certainly measure and that we've measured for a lot of clients. I think, the notion of even what you just mentioned about who you are as a company that's showing up to the home, right? Mm-hmm. So to give you an example, example of a company that we rebranded that was previously called RW Garage Doors. So RW Garage Doors, no real promise there specifically, not necessarily two letters that make a lot of sense to be put together as opposed to
Yeah,
like
they don't
A1.
feel good.
Like A1 Garage makes a little bit more sense than RW, right? Just because
Yeah.
the way that you've heard of A1 before, you haven't really heard of RW. So we changed their name to Right Way Garage Doors. Okay. And
Makes sense.
the idea of what that meant, not only from an external perspective, but an internal perspective. So if you're an employee, the benchmark and the standard that we will hold all employees to is that we will fix things and provide the right way to do things to our customers. And if I'm a customer, I want something done the right way, right? So like it speaks to both audiences. And so, how do you measure what that effect is? Well, I can tell you in a lot of instances, even just average ticket wise, like people raise their average tickets like literally day one, like 15 or 20%.
Yeah.
And people don't bat an eye because they believe there's a reason to pay a premium for the service. It's like, well, I use the analogy sometimes, why would you buy a MacBook when you could get, a PC laptop for probably half the cost? Well, I believe that a MacBook is a better product and I'm going to pay more for it because that's what I believe. Why do I believe that? Well, impressions over time. And I've used Apple products before. So again, like, how do you have people believe that there's a reason why you're better than your competitor? I mean, how you show up, what the website looks like, what the social media is communicating, like all those things are going to leave an impression. Do you want to control that impression or do you want to let them control the impression?
Right.
Because they're going to decide no matter what you do, what they think they're going to get from you. But you want to roll up in a white van or white beater van and then try to get premium prices for your work. It's just not going to happen.
Right.
And you're going to attract the exact type of people that the brand communicates to.
Yeah.
So if you look amateurish, if it looks weak, if it looks unprofessional, you're going to get people that expect to pay the least amount for your service. And maybe that's the world you want to live in. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you're trying to get premium dollars, you need to look as premium as possible. And I think that that's sort of the other thing too, when you mentioned earlier about, well, when is it time to change? You think about the biggest complaint sometimes home service owners have is that I can't get paid the right amount to pay my employees more, all these things they want to do if they could get paid more. And then you look at the branding and what's being communicated to the customer. And I'm like, I know why you can't get more for your work because you don't look like you deserve to get paid more for your work.
Right. Yeah.
So, that notion of that complacency that got you to where you are, is that going to get you to where you want to go? And you could look at even Tommy Mello as an example. When we rebranded A1 Garage, that was a $30 million company. And he recognized at that point that where he wanted to go, he couldn't get there with the brand that he had. So not too many people at $30 million are considering their branding to be a failure and not working. But again, he knew it didn't represent the level of service that they were providing. So there was a disconnect between what he was trying to charge people and what people thought they should pay. And we fixed that for them. And then again, I think he grew another 150 million or 200 million afterwards.
That's amazing.
So
amazing. Okay. So if you had any questions about whether it was time to rebrand, I think that this episode probably helped you at least give you some good notes or reasoning for sure. So as we end all of our episodes, we have to answer the question here. So the question is, this is the Key to Growth podcast. So what is the key to business growth?
Oof.
According to branding, according to you and everything we've talked about?
I think the key is to don't be afraid to look at branding in a different manner than what you think is expected of branding. And that comfort zone is a beautiful place that nothing ever grows in. And so what got you here today probably won't get you to where you want to go in the future.
100%. I love that. Okay. So of course, Dan's book, which I actually got off of Dan's website. I think you can get it on Amazon too. And then you are releasing a new one. Do you have a date or are we just working on it?
Yeah, it's a lot of notes on it. I'm going through it. I would like to think I'll have it in 6 months.
Amazing. So where else can people find you online or if they're ready to start their branding journey with you guys?
Sure. You can go to KickCharge.com and you can fill out the form on there. You can check out some of our work. You can always hit me up on social media. On Facebook usually is where I'm most active. Yeah. And listen too, quite honestly, if you have something that either you're about to do from a brand perspective or, hey, I'm about to get this truck wrap, what do you think? I assure you, I will not try to sell you anything. And I will just try to give you some straight feedback on maybe some simple things that maybe could improve it. And I'm happy to do that for you. Whether you become a client or not is not really my intent. I would just rather you see or have the best opportunity for success. And if I can help in that in any way, just hit me up.
Awesome. This has been great. Thank you so much, Dan.
Thanks, Jen. Good to see you again.